DC sportswriter who went from covering the Redskins to selling organic food. Staunton, the tin of cookies emerged from behind his desk, 3 dozen or so. They were dark chocolate cranberry pumpkin maple. The pumpkin came from real pumpkins, which Joseph White had acquired by asking businesses in this marvelous downtown whether they still needed their decorative Halloween gourds. The cookies were delightful. If White had brought a baked treat like this to the Redskins Park media trailer, which he did, week after week, year after year, during some of the craziest moments in franchise history, I'd have to hire 2 guards to keep reporters away, he noted. But his new colleagues are a bit different than the ones he left behind in Ashburn. 3 dozen homemade cookies here last days, not seconds. He's given up on the idea of throwing parties centered around food. And when White takes his employees out for dinner, he can pay with a $20 bill and get change. These people just don't eat, he said of the staff at Cranberry's Grocery and Eatery. There are other differences, too. The folks inside Cranberry's aren't glued to Twitter, aren't surgically attached to their phones, and don't particularly care whether the Redskins opt for continuity or chaos this offseason. Which isn't to say nothing changes here. On the day I visited the natural food outpost now owned by White, he offered up a brand new creation dreamed up by his staffers, Earl Grey rolls. Imagine a cinnamon roll dipped in bergamot oil, and served warm. They were delightful, too. You might not know White's name, but you've probably read his work, or heard his voice. For about 2 decades, he was the Associated Press's DC sports correspondent, the guy who asked the first question at most Redskins news conferences, the man tasked with describing Christmas Eve at FedEx Field for readers across the country. He wrote about Norv Turner and Marty Schottenheimer, about Steve Spurrier and Joe Gibbs, about Clinton Portis's costumes and Sean Taylor's death. He chronicled the return of baseball, the rise of Ovechkin and the fall of arenas. He traveled to 5 Olympics, covered the National Spelling Bee as well as anyone has ever covered anything, and was named the 2005 App Sportswriter of the Year. Then he left, taking a sabbatical from the app and buying a health food store and restaurant 140 miles from Ashburn. The sabbatical is over. White isn't coming back. How do you go from covering one of the NFL's most chaotic franchises to selling local honey, the greatest honey you'll ever have, and local kombucha, you can feel the probiotics flow through you, and an exclusive label of organic fair trade coffee, while bragging that there is not a drop of high-fructose corn syrup anywhere in the building? After a while, you're just ready for a new adventure, White said, as we munched on cookies and listened to classical music near a stack of local newspapers. 7-Eleven removes gas pumps to allow for more parking. Read one front-page headline. I was originally a theater person, then I became a radio person, then I became a writer, and now I do this. You move on to the next thing, because there's another cool thing to do. If nothing else, I am consistent. First snow creature my store street. Meet Charlie, the @GoCranberries snow gnome. pic.twitter.com/atrolljvju, Joseph White Jr., @JGLNWhite, February 17, 2015. I'm not sure if this is a sports story. Maybe it's a media story, or a retail story. There's probably more than a little wish fulfillment involved. But I do know this, the sports writing business once had an allure of authentic characters. One-of-a-kind types you wouldn't meet elsewhere, people you couldn't possibly forget. I'm sure they still exist, but they seem harder to find every year. And I promise you this, you would never forget Joseph White. What other sportswriter would pull over on his way out of Redskins Park, set up his telescope on top of his car and observe the 4 moons of Jupiter? What other sportswriter would bike to Redskins Park, and then keep his helmet on while interviewing Mike Shanahan? What other sportswriter would produce logic puzzles for other writers to work on during rain delays? What other sportswriter would leave the baseball stadium and immediately go camping, or build an igloo, or travel to Edgar Allan Poe's grave for an annual birthday vigil, or present his media room pals with homemade pumpkin mint chocolate chip cookies, or butterscotch pie, or treats made with hand-picked mulberries, or a full barbecue feast brought back from North Carolina. That one came after his father's death. His dad had taught him that if he ever had spare change, he should do something nice for someone else. When he was tidying up his dad's house, he found some spare change. So he brought back lunch for his friends. On his last day covering the Redskins, the other reporters gave him a standing ovation. "Joe really is one of a kind," wrote former Skins beat writer Mike Jones, when I asked about White. "You could say that about a lot of people, but it really did apply to him, and his quirky ways were part of the reason why everybody liked him. When I think of Joe, I think of a true original, a man who marches to a singular tune in his head," the Post's Liz Clark wrote. "I think what has made him so beloved among fellow sportswriters is that unlike so many journalists, Joe rarely, if ever, complains and lacks the cynicism and pettiness that too often mars the profession. We all find him endearing and gentle and down-to-earth," former Washington Times writer Zach Boyer wrote, "but there's also a quirkiness to him that warms your heart. Joe will be missed because he's simply a good guy," wrote ESPN's John Keem, "and because he liked to bake for us. If White didn't act like everyone else, he didn't write like us, either, glorying in the weirdest stories, the goofiest anecdotes, the most outlandish quotes. I always figured that's why he reveled in covering every inch of the spelling bee, an event he has attended even after leaving the business. Turns out it was more than that. I felt like it was important to tell the stories of the spelling bee kids, because they get such a stereotype about them," he told me. "Hey, this is an awesome kid who plays baseball and the violin and goes to public school, and these are the kids who are going to make a difference in the world. They're going to be the doctors and lawyers and scientists and so forth, which is a whole heck of a lot more important than making a bunch of three-pointers." Arrived in Baltimore for the Poe Vigil W/Cookies for All and scorecards to judge the photosters. Join us. pic.twitter.com/Eatery4JWP, Joseph White Jr., @Jgalen White, January 19, 2014. He didn't dress like us, either. Former Redskins lineman Stephen Bowen, who called White F. because of his Freddy Krueger attire, once stopped an interview, looked at White's sweater and asked, "What the hell are you wearing? Is that sweater from 1989? White thought about it, and told Bowen the sweater was probably 5 years older than that. He recently told a friend that there are 3 things left he wants to buy: a new telescope, a straight razor, and a pair of cross-country skis, and once I get those 3 things, I'll own everything I want." It's a lifestyle that helped open the possibilities of a new business adventure. White, now 54, previously had worked as a country music DJ in North Carolina, and for rap radio in London. Nearly 2 decades covering Washington sports was a long time tilting at the same windmill. By the end, it felt like he didn't need to use his tape recorder anymore. He had heard the same quotes in 1997, and 2001, and 2005, heard rookies saying how happy they were to be in Washington and optimistic coaches promising a fresh and new era. His brother had lived in Staunton for years, and White and his son loved visiting the arts and theater town. So out of nowhere, he emailed the owners of Cranberries, asking what retail niches in the active downtown district still needed filling. They told him they were ready to retire, and suggested he just buy their store. Many months later, he did. He took a 2-year sabbatical from the app, but knew pretty quickly that he wouldn't be going back. And so, on the day I visited, instead of chronicling the melancholic end of yet another playoff-free Redskins season, White was rejoicing about a delivery from Blue Ridge Bakery, and getting change from the bank. "You're awesome," he told the teller as he left, and singing show-tunes from South Pacific with a customer-turned-friend, and getting ready to make posters for that week's trivia night. Introducing a weekly trivia night was one of his first innovations as store owner. He writes the questions himself. When protesters gather in front of the nearby courthouse, he brings them free coffee. When staffers need a break,